Hello everyone, I hope you're in fine form today. I must say a big thank you to those of you who've started subscribing to my channel this week. There's been quite a jump up in the numbers and I found this surprising and terrifying, but thank you. I'll remain committed to what I want to do, to bring you impartial astrological takes on important figures and events. And what I'm going to do today is take a look at the chart of Russell Brand. This one is a stunning example of the power of astrology for predictive work. Before we look at the unfolding of Russell Brand's life, we'll just have a quick look at his natal chart and recap on some of those very powerful alignments we can see in it. And so here we have Russell's chart drawn up. The birth time is 5 minutes past midnight. Russell has previously stated that he was born a few minutes after midnight. We need to bear in mind, therefore, that this ascendant may be a degree or two out, but then again it may be accurate. So initially, we're working with a Capricorn ascendant. We have a chart that is very heavy on fire and cardinal signs. So we have Aries overtones to this one. If we look to the chart ruler, we can see Saturn in Cancer, where it simply is not happy, squaring a Jupiter in Aries. And this is absolutely exact. In fact, Saturn makes no other aspects apart from this square to Jupiter. Saturn and Jupiter aren't personal planets, they're social planets. But when we have a very tight square like this, it's important. You may also notice that that midheaven axis opposes Saturn-Jupiter midpoint. So this aspect is important with regard to Russell's career as well. What is important for people with this aspect is to develop their own hard-won philosophy of how life works. The principle of Saturn, which limits, is pessimistic, can bring failures, is diametrically opposed to that of Jupiter, which is about faith, abundance, expansion. And there can be a teeter-tottering between these two extremes in the individual's life. This is an aspect that we can see with people who have suicidal tendencies, bipolar disorder, people who have initial difficulties in achieving abundance in life. There may be setbacks and falls from grace. Sometimes this can play out financially, although it doesn't inherently need to, because Jupiter is about abundance, but not necessarily about financial abundance. But nonetheless, if the individual doesn't develop their own set of beliefs about themselves and the unfolding of their lives, they can become pessimistic, and this will thus have an impact on their ability to attract abundance. I like to have a look at what's going on when famous or notorious people fall from grace, and this particular aspect regularly crops up. And with that Saturn placed in the 6th house, there could also be health issues here. Now, if we turn to the Sun and the Moon, we'll start with the Sun in Gemini. It's actually conjunct its own ruler, and we have this massive emphasis on mental powers, on quick-witty communication. There can be inconstancy, there can be gossiping, the trickster element. And we can see this pair trining Uranus, giving that lightning-fast grasp of intellectual matters. You might also notice that amongst its other aspects, the Sun is pulled into this rectangle shape, which draws in Pluto, Neptune, the Moon and Mars. And what we have here is a mystic rectangle. And so we have tremendous resources and resilience to keep coming back. This is a blessing to have in a chart. We can also see that the Sun is opposing Neptune. This aspect shows up where the father figure usually simply was unavailable, distant, absent, potentially mentally ill or addicted themselves. But the outcome is the same. Our self-identity is shaky, and at its worst extreme, we can actually be deluded There's a propensity to need to escape the mundane facts of our existence with this one. And yet at the same time, Russell is not weak. We have a particularly fearless and probing aspect to our nature with that trine to Pluto in the 8th house. And let's look at that stellium in Aries where Russell's moon is situated. We can see that conjunction with Mars, which again is conjunct with Jupiter. Moon Aries, we know, will be headstrong, impetuous. This is action driven. Can also be a selfish placement. The moon ruler, Mars, is also in Aries and conjunct the moon. We know this person will have a high level of self-interest. We can expect a dynamo with this one. Impulsive, potentially aggressive, looking for control. This really isn't a very sensitive coupling. And so we can estrange people by being too self-involved and overbearing. And this opposition to Pluto out there in the 8th house is making this worse. Pluto rules the 8th house. And here we do find crisis, transformation, control, very deep, strong emotions. And this would be the house that we would be drawn to if we were looking for a drug problem, as opposed to alcoholism, where we would be more likely to look at the 12th and the position of Neptune. The mother figure is potentially drawn into this one because the moon, of course, represents our mother. When the moon opposes Pluto, we may not feel like we had the nurturing that we wanted or needed. We can experience the mother as controlling, or alternatively, we may not feel we have sufficient control over our early emotional environment. So we have a fear of letting go of emotional control, and we keep setting ourselves up for relationships that may not work out as we replay these early emotional scenarios. We have abundant energy and this immense desire to succeed, ruthless even. There's also a combination of planets here that I can see in the charts of people who need an escape route from their life. And so often this can be alcohol, drugs. And that combination is the moon, the node, Neptune, and in Russell's case, the sun is drawn in too. It's as though this is a lifetime when the individual will be given opportunities to progress through an addiction. Life is too cold and too harsh for these individuals. Reality is not how they imagined it would be, and their lives are not unfolding in a way that they can cope with. Reality is harsh, and so the individual softens it by use of other behaviours which allow an escape. We can also see that strong Venus sitting tightly on the 7th house and squaring Uranus. If we were thinking that this inclined Russell to be loving and nurturing in all his close relationships, that's not necessarily so. Consider this. The 7th house is where we meet our close and formal relationships, long-term partners. We give that part of our psyche out to the other in the hope that they will complete it for us. So Russell is looking for love and nurturing from the outside. But of course, if we are to be whole, we need to fulfill that function within ourselves instead of looking to the outside environment to provide it for us. And with that square to Uranus, we certainly have unpredictability, a need for excitement and stimulation. This aspect can be seen in people who have multiple short-term relationships that come to nothing. But that isn't a hard and fast rule. These people can also be highly principled, but one way or another, issues like space, freedom, independence are very important. And Russell's Uranus is squaring his ascendant, which immediately makes me think of that slogan he has, stay free, because this Uranus really needs to be without restriction, have all its personal freedoms, and would absolutely loathe control by other people. Where would we find Russell's self-confessed sex addiction in this chart? I believe it is in that Pluto in the 8th house, opposing the Moon, Mars in Aries. But I'm also very interested in what the Magi Society's take on matters like this is. And they have already identified Russell as having a couple of aspects indicating sex addiction and serial cheater. The Magi Society's interpretations are slightly different, and they place increased emphasis on asteroids like Juno, Sappho, Sedna, and Russell has some difficult combinations of these. Now, people who have a lot of fire in their charts, especially if there's a few personal planets involved, can become very good at weaving myths in which they are the hero in the story, taking centre stage, and everyone can see and agree that that is indeed the case. Now, when that myth starts to unravel and fall apart, and we no longer have the audience seeing here our central position of hero, these people are very punctured and really quite emotionally vulnerable until they are able to pick up and weave the next myth. So we're going to move on now and look at the transits and progressions that have been unfolding for Russell, starting around the date of 16th of September. The transits in this case are exceptionally powerful, and so let's start off by looking at those. Now we can immediately see that by transit, heavyweight Pluto has slowly inched out of Russell's 12th house and started crossing the ascendant. Now, Pluto has been in Russell's 12th house since at least 2010, and Pluto drags out of the murky depths anything that needs to be brought into the light. The 12th house is the house of seclusion, of self-undoing. Our secrets and hidden enemies lay in this house too. And when Pluto crosses the ascendant, it dredges up all that stuff and brings it forward into our consciousness for us to look at. This is an intense transit. And one can't help noticing that Pluto would actually have begun this transit even back in last year, 2022. And so perhaps Russell had prior warning of events that were about to unfold, of a background investigation going on, of allegations being made. We can also see that transiting Pluto would have been putting immense pressure on his Venus out there on his descendant, and it would have been simultaneously squaring Chiron and his Uranus. I couldn't overstate how huge and stressful this transit would be, and it's been going on some time, placing pressure on relationships, bringing old wounds to the surface, breaking down our resistance with immense and inexorable strength. But as it moves into the first house and brings things to light, to our consciousness, we are able then to tackle old behaviour patterns, for example, that may have been exposed during its transit of the 12th house. Sometimes when Pluto opposes Venus, we may lose a personal relationship that we hold dear. That's not a hard and fast rule though, but what we can be sure of is that deep subterranean feelings, and intense feelings too, of jealousy, abandonment, security, are dredged up for us to deal with. Relationships may become stronger as this transit passes away. Venus also has some financial symbolism, and that too would be under threat now. Transiting Saturn has been moving through Russell's first house since 2020, and this can be a period of intense hard work, of new projects, of life phases where we are reinventing ourselves and beginning a whole new cycle. But Saturn started squaring Russell's midheaven around February or March 2023. So this was something that was already unfolding. Difficulties or limitations with regard to the midheaven career or professional standing would already have made themselves known earlier this year. And as Saturn retrogrades back through the early degrees of Pisces, we see it go direct again this November, early in the month. when it again makes that square to Russell's midheaven, and perhaps we will establish a bit more then about the adjustments he's being forced to incorporate. Neptune has been trining Russell's natal Venus since earlier this year, and this is a sort of honeymoon transit. We see things through rose-coloured glasses. Although we can potentially fall in love or deepen our love for somebody, it's not necessarily a realistic transit. This is one where we need to wait for the transit to pass before making any new or serious commitments. It will be softening the blows that are being hammered into this chart by Pluto and Saturn. We also have a couple of other transits which would confirm that this really is an important period or year in Russell's life. This would be where the North Node is forming a passing square to his ascendant in September and conjuncting his Chiron as it does so. And transiting Chiron has conjuncted his Jupiter, but of course, because there is that exact natal square between Jupiter and Saturn, it's squaring Saturn. The synchronicities in Russell's progressed chart are stunning. And if we start by looking at his progressed Sun, we can see it there conjunct the descendant and literally minutes away from being in exact square to that natal Uranus. And so that inward need to adjust to shock, surprise, disruption, and to experience this through our relationship with other is encapsulated in this square. And so let's take a look at Russell's progressed moon. It's moving through its 12th house, the house of secrets, of isolation, of self-undoing. This can be a period in our lives where we retract more from the world and into ourselves. But it also marks a phase where we have less access to resources somehow. Our position is weakened, and we can see that Russell's progressed moon was opposing his Saturn around the 16th of September, again within a few minutes. And it was, of course, squaring that natal Jupiter simultaneously. So we know this was a very difficult time for Russell. And his progressed moon will carry on moving through his 12th house for almost a year yet. Progressed Mercury is also accentuating that natal Saturn-Jupiter square. On the 16th of September, it was conjuncting that Saturn and therefore squaring the Jupiter. This would be a time when our attention is brought sharply to concrete and pertinent detail. There could be a depressive or pessimistic overtone to it. We looked closely at this Saturn-Jupiter square at the beginning of this video, and a lot of attention is being focused onto that Saturn right now. Over the next year, Russell's going to have some more key developments in his chart by progression and transit. We can see, for example, that progressed moon is drawing into an exact opposition with his progressed Sun over the coming months, marking a full moon in his lunation cycle. We're now going to take a look into the future, into 2024. This chart shows the progressions for June 2024, and I want to draw your attention to that progressed moon. It's currently around 26-27 degrees of Capricorn, and what's going to happen is that it will burst through into his first house, but just shortly before that, it will be squaring Chiron, Venus and Uranus in quick succession. It is also going to pass transiting Pluto along its way and form a conjunction with it. So we can expect quite a lot of activity mid next year. In August/September, that progressed Sun, progressed Moon opposition will become exact. Remember, this is a time when we can experience conflict and need to make adjustments. Transiting Pluto is going to carry on forming this on-off opposition to his progressed Sun in the 7th house, marking a need for transformation. There will be the help of quite a stabilising transit from Saturn as it trines its own position. This will start earlier in 2024 and continue on-off during the year via retrograde motion. In all, there's still substantial work ahead. In concluding, I can't overstate what an intense year Russell has had. Many of these issues have been building behind the scenes much earlier than September 2023, and so we may not have the full facts of everything just yet. In fact, at this stage, we have allegations. We have some large organisations making major moves, and also trial by media across multiple countries, which is very difficult. Let's see what 2024 brings. The next video I'm going to put together is a look at Joe Biden, assuming that he will run for president in the United States next year. I hope you found this informative. Do take care.